They mocked him for wasting his last dollar on a rotten water tower. A broken man, a little girl, and an old German shepherd standing against the richest rancher in Colorado. No one believed in them, no one cared about the truth until the fire came, and the ground itself answered with a roar of water. What happened next will restore your faith in courage and second chances. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. I want to see how far this story reaches. And if you believe loyalty deserves reward, if you believe no voice is too small to change the world, hit that subscribe button, because this tale of hope and survival will stay with you forever. Snow had fallen all night in Silver Creek, a mountain town tucked deep in the Colorado Rockies. By morning, the streets wore a heavy coat of white, broken only by the dark ridges of wagon wheels and the crunch of boots. The air was so sharp it burned the lungs when people spoke, and even the wealthiest ranchers of the territory wrapped themselves in furs and wool. On the edge of town, the abandoned water tower rose like a crooked sentinel. Its timbers leaned, its roof sagged, and every child who passed whispered that it was haunted. At the center of the frozen town square, an auction was about to end. Evan Carter, 36, stood with his calloused hands shoved deep in the pockets of his thin jacket. Once a skilled carpenter, his trade had fallen on hard times. A fire the previous year had destroyed half the lumber mill he worked in, leaving him to take odd jobs repairing barns and fences. He had the look of a man who had been weathered by both work and sorrow. Lean shoulders, face hollow from skipped meals, brown hair unkempt beneath a cheap wool cap. Yet his eyes, gray like storm clouds over the peaks, still held something unbroken, stubborn hope. Beside him stood his daughter, Lily Carter, 7 years old. She was pale from the long winter, her cheeks marked by windburn, and her red knitted scarf handmade by her late grandmother hung loose around her neck. Lily was small for her age with a fragile frame, but her wide hazel eyes missed nothing. She clung tightly to the thick fur around the neck of Max, their German shepherd. Max was 8 years old, his black and tan coat dulled by time but still thick against the cold. A faint scar curved along his right flank, barely visible beneath the fur, a remnant of an old accident when he had shielded Lily from a falling fence post years earlier. His left ear drooped slightly, giving him a look both noble and boyish. Max had not always been their dog. He had once belonged to Evan's brother, a soldier named Matthew, who had gone overseas and never returned. When Matthew's letters stopped, Evan took in the German shepherd pup he had named after his own nickname, Max. To Evan, keeping the name was a way of honoring his brother's memory. To Lily, it was simply the name of her protector and best friend. The auctioneer's voice cracked in the icy air. "Going once, going twice." 50 cents, Evan called out, pulling 2 tarnished quarters from his pocket. He lifted them high with a trembling hand, as though the coins themselves carried more weight than they truly did. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Sterling ranchers in thick coats slapped one another on the back. "He's mad," one shouted. "The fool's buying a pile of firewood," another added. "Sold," the auctioneer barked with more amusement than ceremony, to Mr. Carter for the grand sum of 50 cents. The gavel came down, and the crowd dispersed, still chuckling. Some shook their heads, others sneered openly, but no one cared to look twice at the leaning water tower by the frozen creek. No one except Evan. He felt Lily tugging at his sleeve. "Papa, why this one?" "It looks ready to fall," Evan crouched to her height. "Sometimes, Lily, the things everyone else throws away are the things worth keeping." "You just have to look closer," Max barked once, sharp and certain, as though he understood. His amber eyes fixed on the tower, tail stiff, nose twitching as if scenting something buried deep beneath the snow. A low rumble of an engine broke the moment. A police cruiser rolled slowly into the square, its tires crunching over the ice. Officer Caleb Hayes, 38, leaned out the window. Caleb was broad-shouldered, his sandy blonde hair cut short, streaked faintly with early gray. His square jaw was peppered with stubble, and his uniform looked lived in, practical rather than polished. He was known in Silver Creek for fairness and a quiet patience that sometimes masked the grief of his own divorce 2 years earlier. Folks said he had grown more protective of townspeople since then, as if guarding them filled the silence left in his own home. "Carter," Caleb called, his voice carrying in the frosty air. "I'd be careful with that tower. Randall Pierce has been sniffing around anything tied to water rights lately. Man's buying up land faster than snow falls in January." Randall Pierce, his name alone drew uneasy glances. Owner of the largest bottled water company in 3 counties, he was a man of sharp suits and sharper ambition. Where others saw community, Randall saw profit. He had a talent for convincing neighbors to sell low, and when persuasion failed, whispers of intimidation followed. Evan straightened, brushing the frost from his knees. It was 50 cents, Caleb. Hardly a fortune. And besides, he said, his eyes flicking toward the leaning tower, sometimes what's empty on the outside isn't empty at all. The next morning dawned with a pale sun that did little to chase away the bitter cold. Silver Creek sat muffled in white, the air brittle with frost. Evan Carter pulled his collar high and guided Lily and Max back to the crooked water tower, their boots crunching through the snowdrifts. The laughter of the crowd from yesterday still clung to his memory, but it only steeled his resolve to see what others had overlooked. The wooden door of the tower resisted at first, swollen from years of storms and neglect. Evan pressed his shoulder against it until the hinges gave with a groan. Inside, the air was different, musty, yes, but somehow solid, not the rotting emptiness he had expected. Dust swirled in thin shafts of light that pierced through cracks in the siding, but beneath the grime, the framework revealed itself. Thick beams, tightly joined, oak preserved like stone. It was a paradox, a skeleton that looked stronger on the inside than its body suggested outside. Lily, her red scarf tucked tight beneath her chin, stepped in cautiously, her small boots tapping the wooden floor. Max padded beside her, ears swiveling, nose low to the ground. He sniffed around the base of the tower, then pressed his head between 2 warped planks. A low growl rumbled in his chest, sharp and uneasy. "What is it, boy?" Evan asked, crouching beside him. His calloused fingers traced the planks Max pawed at. Unlike the other boards, these had been nailed over a panel in the wall too deliberate, like someone had hidden something rather than repaired it. Evan's eyes rose higher. On one of the main support beams, faint carvings spread like veins in the wood. Arrows curved into spirals, their lines crossing in patterns that seemed meaningless at first glance but tugged at recognition. He pulled his glove off and brushed away the dust with the back of his hand. Memories flickered afternoons long ago when his grandfather had walked him across ridgelines, teaching him to read the secret signs surveyors once carved into trees and posts. He remembered the old man's hand, gnarled with age, pointing to a spiral etched in stone and saying, "This mark is for water that runs forever. Find this, and you'll never thirst." Evan's breath caught. "Grandpa," he whispered. "Papa, look," Lily said softly. She had crouched with her school notebook balanced on her knees, tongue poking at the corner of her mouth as she sketched the marks. Her pencil traced arrow after arrow until she noticed something strange numbers hidden in the curls. "These aren't just pictures. They're steps, like a code." She looked up, eyes wide. Evan took the notebook, his pulse quickening. She was right. The numbers matched the kind of measurements surveyors used, paces between landmarks. Before he could reply, the crunch of boots outside reached his ears. Max barked once, standing at attention, his amber eyes sharp. Evan stiffened until a familiar voice called through the crack of the door. "Carter? You in there?" It was Officer Caleb Hayes. He ducked inside, brushing snow from his navy jacket. The steam of his breath mingled with the motes of dust. His square jaw was tight, eyes flicking from Evan to the suspicious boards, then to the carvings. He didn't smile. "Word travels fast," Caleb said. "You stirring up ghosts already?" "Just looking," Evan answered cautiously. Caleb crossed the floor, boots thumping in the hollow silence. He pressed his hand against one of the beams, fingers tracing the spirals. His expression darkened. "You ever hear of Widow Palmer? She owned this tower years back, said her husband built it with his own hands." Evan shook his head. Caleb glanced at Lily, then back at Evan. "They didn't leave town because they wanted to." Randall Pierce squeezed them out. Something about permits. Said the tower wasn't legal anymore. The widow swore otherwise, but no one would stand against Randall. She left in the middle of the night with just a wagon. Folks whispered it was over water rights, but nobody wanted to get in Pierce's way. Evan's jaw tightened. He looked again at the spirals. If Widow Palmer's husband had marked them, then the tower wasn't just a rickety relic. It was guarding something Randall Pierce wanted hidden. "Maybe you ought to walk away," Caleb said, his voice softer now. "Pierce doesn't forgive easy. He doesn't fight clean." Max growled again, nose pressed hard against the boarded panel. The sound vibrated in the wooden frame, unsettling in its certainty. Lily laid her hand on his head, whispering, "Easy, Max. We're listening." Her small fingers smudged pencil across the page as she added the last of the marks. "Papa," she said again, "these steps, they spiral to the middle. It's like a treasure map, but not for gold, for water." Evan bent to kiss her hair. Pride warmed his chest, but fear cooled it just as quickly. Above them, a faint clang drew their eyes upward. The ceiling beams crossed beneath a small platform, and in the dim light, Evan saw the shape of a bell. Rust clung to its edges, the clapper hanging still. He climbed the ladder, his boots leaving prints in the dust, and brushed away decades of cobwebs. Letters revealed themselves in the metal. P. 1949. Palmer. 1949. The year the tower was raised. The bell was more than decoration. It had been a signal, perhaps a warning, perhaps a promise. He tugged at the rope, but it disintegrated in his hand, the fibers long gone. Yet the bell gave a faint, hollow moan, like memory echoing down the years. He descended slowly, dust clinging to his shoulders. Caleb's gaze followed him, unreadable. "If you're smart, Carter, you'll keep this to yourself. Randall hears a whisper. He'll come running." Evan looked to his daughter, to Max, and back at the spirals etched in wood. He thought of his grandfather's voice, of Widow Palmer forced from her home, and of how every man in town had laughed when he spent his last 50 cents. His fists clenched. "Maybe I'm done walking away," he said. The silence that followed was heavy as the snow outside, pressing down, daring him to prove it true. By the time the sun began to drop behind the mountain ridge, Silver Creek lay in long blue shadows. The water tower stood silent in its patch of snow, a crooked monument no one wanted except Evan Carter and the small circle of family who followed him. He had spent most of the day brushing away dust from the strange carvings inside, sketching what he could and puzzling over the story Caleb had told about Widow Palmer. Now, as twilight bled across the sky, Evan and Lily lingered near the base of the tower with Max resting faithfully at their feet. The crunch of polished boots broke the quiet. A black Cadillac rolled to a stop along the frozen road, its engine purring like a predator waiting to strike. The door opened and Randall Pierce stepped out. Pierce was in his early 50s but looked older, weathered not by labor but by wealth's demands. His face was sharp, his jaw clean-shaven, the kind of countenance that once might have inspired trust but now carried a hardness that unsettled. His gray overcoat hung perfectly pressed, his boots gleamed despite the slush. What set him apart most were his eyes, pale, watchful, the eyes of a man who calculated every advantage and rarely smiled without purpose. He approached with what passed for charm. "Mr. Carter," he said, voice smooth, cultivated. "Quite the purchase you've made." He drew a leather envelope from his coat pocket, the kind used by bankers and lawyers. "I thought I might save you from regret." $5,000. He extended the envelope as if bestowing a favor. Evan didn't move to take it. His hands remained at his sides, stiff against the cold. "Why so generous, Mr. Pierce?" "Because I don't like to see men waste themselves," Pierce said, tilting his head, a faint smile crossing his lips. "And because I know what it is to want. You and I were not so different, not so. We both understand that in Silver Creek, water is life, and whoever controls the water," he paused, his voice dropping low, "controls everything else." Behind him, another car door opened. A tall man in a brown coat slid out and leaned casually against the Cadillac. He was younger, mid-30s, hair cut close to the scalp, his stance relaxed yet deliberate. This was Mark Hanley, Randall's assistant. Folks in town whispered that Hanley had once been a prizefighter before debts tied him to Pierce. His nose had been broken more than once, his hands scarred, but his expression carried the impassive calm of a man who followed orders without hesitation. He said nothing now, only positioned himself by the door like a shadow. Max bristled instantly. The dog rose to his paws, fur along his back stiffening, placing his body squarely between Lily and Hanley. A growl simmered from his throat, low and dangerous. Lily clutched the dog's ruff, her small hand half hidden in the thick fur, but Max did not move. His amber eyes never left Hanley's. "Papa," Lily whispered, pointing toward the floorboards inside the tower. A dark streak stained the wood near the base. She crouched to touch it, her finger coming away smudged with tar-like mud. She wrinkled her nose. "It smells bad." Max bent his head, sniffed once, and sneezed violently, his ears flattening. He barked sharply as if to warn them all. Evan crouched beside her, frowning. The mud was too dark, too oily to have come from ordinary runoff. He wiped it on a rag, his mind running through possibilities. Pierce's voice cut through the silence. 5,000, Carter. Enough to set you and your girl comfortable. Enough to make a man forget curiosity. Evan stood, jaw tight. "It's not for sale." The smile on Pierce's lips faltered. For a moment the polished mask slipped, revealing the iron beneath. His eyes hardened, cold and unblinking. "You're a carpenter with no steady work, Carter. And yet you turn down more money than you've seen in years." Interesting choice. Caleb's patrol car rolled past slowly at that moment, headlights sweeping across the snow. Inside, Officer Hayes sat watchful. He slowed, his sharp eyes catching the Cadillac, the figures standing outside, the leather envelope glinting in Pierce's hand. Without stopping, he pulled a small notebook and jotted the license plate of a tanker truck idling further down the road, one of Pierce's, marked with the company's blue logo. Hayes didn't linger, but his jaw tightened as he drove on. Back at the tower, silence thickened. Max's growl never ceased, vibrating in the air like a warning bell. Hanley smirked faintly but did not step closer. Pierce extended his hand. "I'll give you a moment to reconsider. Men who know their place prosper in Silver Creek." Evan looked down at the offered hand but did not move. He saw it for what it was, not a handshake, but a chain disguised as courtesy. He shook his head slowly. "No deal, Mr. Pierce." For the first time, Pierce's smile collapsed completely. His fingers curled into a fist before he slid them back into his pocket. The pale eyes glittered. "Remember this, Carter. In this town, water doesn't just quench thirst. It decides who lives well and who doesn't live at all." He turned on his heel, his coat swishing through the frost. Hanley followed silently, slipping back into the Cadillac without a word. The car door slammed shut with a finality that echoed across the snow. The Cadillac's taillights glowed red as it rolled away, casting long shadows across the crooked tower. Evan stood rigid, his breath misting in the air. Lily pressed herself closer to Max, her voice small but firm. "Papa, I don't like him." "Neither do I," Evan said, staring at the retreating car. "And I don't like what he's hiding." Max barked once more at the road where the Cadillac had gone, then circled back to the base of the tower, sniffing insistently at the dark mud. His instincts were unshaken. Something foul lingered beneath, something Pierce wanted buried. Night settled over Silver Creek with a heaviness that made even the stars seem weighed down by the cold. Evan Carter sat hunched at the small table in the cabin he rented at the edge of town. A lantern burned low, casting long, trembling shadows across the walls. Before him lay his grandfather's leather-bound journal, pages stained from age, the edges curled from years of mountain air. Beside the journal lay the notebook where Lily had carefully copied the strange spirals and arrows carved into the water tower's beams. Evan traced the drawings with his finger, then flipped through the brittle pages until he found their match. There it was, an old surveyor's system, spirals meaning centered water, arrows showing direction and distance. When arranged together, they formed a path, winding inward like a coiled snake until it stopped exactly at the center of the tower. His heart pounded as if his grandfather himself were whispering across time. Max lay at his feet, ears twitching even in rest, his breath steady. Lily sat curled under a quilt on the other chair, chin propped on her fist. Her eyes followed her father's hands with solemn curiosity. "So it's a map?" she asked. "It's more than a map," Evan murmured. "It's a promise. Your great-grandfather always said water was worth more than gold out here." Max stirred, as though understanding the gravity of the words. He rose, padded across the cabin, and pawed at a pile of rags in the corner. His nails clicked against something hard. Evan frowned and pulled the bundle aside. Inside was a measuring chain, an old surveyor's tool, its brass links dull but intact, with faint etchings of units long outdated. He remembered it from his grandfather's chest, thought lost after the fire at the mill. Somehow it had survived, carried here with the journal. Evan held it up, the weight solid and true. When he laid the chain across Lily's notebook, the measurements aligned perfectly with the numbers hidden in the spirals. "It fits," Lily whispered, awe softening her voice. A sharp bark from Max made both of them jump. He rushed to the door, tail stiff, nose pressed hard against the wood. Evan set the chain down and blew out the lantern. Through the window, he saw faint headlights crawling slowly along the creek bed. A tanker truck, painted with the blue Pierce Company logo, moved as though trying not to be noticed. The sound of its engine was a low growl against the silence of the night. Evan's stomach tightened. "They're dumping again." At that moment, a knock rattled the door. Max growled deep, muscles taut. Evan lifted the latch cautiously, ready to slam it shut if it was one of Pierce's men. But it was Officer Caleb Hayes, snow dusting his coat shoulders, his face stern. Caleb stepped inside quickly, closing the door against the cold. His jaw was set tight, the steel gray of his eyes sharper than usual. "I got a tip," he said in a low voice. "Anonymous call to the station. Said Pierce's trucks would be running tonight. Waste disposal, Lower Creek." "Lower Creek?" Evan asked, anger creeping into his voice. "That's where half the town's kids play in summer. Where people fish." Caleb nodded grimly. "If he poisons the water and claims this tower's no good, it strengthens his hold. He plays both ends, destroy the old source, control the new." Lily hugged Max's neck, her eyes wide. "Papa, he can't take all the water." "Can he?" Evan knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Not if we find what's beneath that tower first." Caleb glanced at the journal, then the chain. He raised his brows. "Your grandfather left you more than stories, didn't he?" Evan closed the book with care. "He taught me how to see what others miss. And right now, these marks point to something hidden under the tower." Max barked again, sharp and insistent. They returned to the tower under the pale glow of the moon, their breaths steaming as they walked. Inside, the air seemed thicker, as though the wood held its breath. Max trotted straight to the pile of hay in the center and began digging furiously, scattering straw with his paws. His nails scraped metal. Evan hurried forward, pulling aside the rest with his bare hands. There, set flush into the floor, was an iron cover, 3 feet square, its surface etched with faint letters. J. Palmer, 1949. Blessing runs deep. The words made the hair on his arms rise. Widow Palmer's husband had carved his name here, leaving behind a message both practical and spiritual. This was no ordinary well. It was a legacy. Lily crouched, brushing her small hand across the cold iron. She giggled suddenly. If Max had fingers, he'd open it himself. Her laughter filled the tower, a brief lightness in the heavy dark. Even Caleb cracked the faintest smile. But the moment broke quickly as the rumble of the tanker truck drifted closer from the creek bed. The engine noise was deliberate, slow, as if daring anyone to notice. Evan's breath caught. The night was no longer safe. He pressed his hand to the iron cover, feeling the chill seep into his bones. Somewhere beneath lay salvation, while outside rolled the threat of ruin. The dawn came gray and biting, snow crusted with ice that cracked under boots. Evan Carter carried his grandfather's survey chain back to the tower, Lily skipping beside him in her too big winter coat, Max trotting ahead with tail low but ears sharp. Officer Caleb Hayes joined them, his patrol car parked discreetly at the edge of the road, frost still clinging to its windshield. Inside the tower, the air was thick with the scent of old wood and damp hay. Evan laid the chain across the floorboards, carefully aligning it with the spiral pattern Lily had drawn in her notebook. She stood close, pencil in hand, ready to record every measurement. Caleb leaned in the doorway, arms folded, eyes watchful, his presence like a silent shield. The chain clicked as Evan stretched it link by link across the dusty boards. Every arrow carved in the wood matched, each number translating into paces that wound inwards like a coiling snake. Max followed the path with his nose, circling tighter and tighter until he stopped at the center of the tower, ears pricked forward. He barked once, sharp and certain, and looked up at Evan as if to say, "Here." Evan knelt and brushed away the last of the hay. Beneath lay the iron cover they had uncovered last night, black with age, its edges sealed with dirt. He slid his fingers along the seam. Cold rose from it like breath from a cave, damp and earthy, carrying the scent of something ancient. Lily crouched beside him, her mitten brushing the rim. "Papa," she whispered, eyes wide with wonder. "The water's waiting." Max barked again, this time 3 times, each bark echoing off the beams like an oath. Evan worked a crowbar beneath the lip of the cover, his muscles strained, sweat beading on his brow despite the cold air. The iron shifted with a groan, reluctant to reveal its secret. A gust of damp air surged upward, misting against his face. Beneath was darkness, deep and steady, the sound of a faint trickle far below. "It's real," Evan murmured. His grandfather's stories, the symbols, the promise, it was all true. Before the moment could settle, Max stiffened, ears swiveling toward the doorway. His growl rolled low and deep. Caleb straightened instantly, hand drifting toward his holster. Outside, the crunch of boots on snow came closer, more than one set, deliberate and heavy. Evan froze, crowbar still wedged in the iron lip. Lily pressed close to Max, eyes darting to the doorway. Caleb motioned sharply, pulling Lily back with a protective arm. He raised a finger to his lips. Silence. Through the cracks in the wall, the glare of headlights flashed against the snow. A truck door slammed, then another. Voices drifted in, muffled but harsh. "Boss says torch it," one man said. A second voice laughed. "Easy enough. Folks will believe anything. Old tower, bad wiring, accident waiting to happen." Randall Pierce's voice cut through, cool and commanding, though he himself wasn't visible. "Do it clean. Say it was a heater. Nothing left but ash." Evan's stomach dropped. They weren't just here to frighten him. They meant to erase the tower, erase the secret it guarded. Lily, clutching something in her small fist, tugged at Evan's sleeve. When he looked down, she pressed her brass button, the one she had found by the base days ago, into the crack of the iron cover. She whispered, "So we don't lose it. It will know it's ours." She pushed it down until it wedged in place, hidden yet sure, a child's claim staked in iron. Evan's throat tightened. Even in fear, his daughter thought of marking the truth for the future. He squeezed her shoulder, pride and terror mixing in his chest. Max's growl deepened, hackles rising, muscles coiled like springs. The German shepherd stood between Lily and the doorway, body taut, eyes glowing amber in the dim light. Caleb crouched low, his jaw tight, ready to react. The men outside shuffled closer, the scent of kerosene wafting faintly through the cracks. A match struck somewhere, flaring briefly in the dark. Evan felt the iron cover beneath his hand, cold and damp, like the heart of the earth holding its breath. The fight for Silver Creek was no longer a matter of whispers and warnings. It had begun. The first spark caught with a hiss, tiny against the darkness, but deadly in its promise. Evan Carter smelled the kerosene before he saw the flame. It spread quickly across the hay at the base of the tower, smoke curling upward in black ribbons. The old wood moaned as the fire licked at its edges, embers glowing like eyes in the gloom. Max erupted into motion. The German shepherd darted toward the ladder, claws scrambling against the boards. He leapt, teeth fastening on the frayed rope of the rusted bell above. His weight yanked it down with a screech, the clapper smashing against the metal. The bell roared awake, its deep, mournful clang exploding into the night air. Over and over it tolled, each note carrying across the frozen town, a call no one could ignore. Caleb Hayes pulled his radio from his belt, voice clipped and urgent as he called in the fire. His face, already hard from years of police work, tightened even more as the flames surged. "We've got an active blaze at the Palmer Tower," he barked. "Get every truck now!" Evan grabbed a burlap sack, soaking it in the snow pile just outside, and beat at the flames nearest the iron cover. His lungs burned, the smoke clawing at his throat. He wasn't just fighting to save the tower, he was fighting to save the secret it held, the lifeblood that Randall Pierce wanted buried. Outside, headlights tore across the night as one of Pierce's tanker trucks screeched sideways on the icy road. The driver, a burly man with a shaved head, fought the wheel, but the tires spun helplessly. The truck slid into a drift, metal grinding, and came to a halt with its back end jackknifed across the creek bed. A heavy thud followed, then a hiss. From beneath the vehicle, a pipe broke loose, spewing dark liquid onto the snow. The stench of chemicals rose sharp and sour, filling the air. Townsfolk arriving from the bell's summons stopped short, covering their mouths as they realized what they were seeing. Pierce's company wasn't just moving water. They were poisoning it. Back inside the tower, Lily clung to Max's ruff, coughing, her eyes watering from smoke. She tried to stay low like Caleb had taught her, but fear trembled in her voice. "Papa, it's too big. The fire's too big." Evan dropped the soaked sack, falling to his knees near the iron cover. His palms pressed flat against the heated metal. It was expanding, groaning under the strain of fire. He prayed silently, desperately, that the pressure below was real, that the stories were true. The answer came in a deep, resonant thud that shook the floor beneath them, a single thunderous bup, like the earth itself drawing breath. Then the iron plate jumped. Cracks split the dirt around its edges. With a roar, a geyser of water burst upward, slamming through the fire. It wasn't just water, it was silver fire of its own kind, blasting into the rafters, scattering sparks and embers. The column rose 20 feet, crashing against the beams, and cascaded back down to drench the burning hay. Steam rolled off the floor, hissing, extinguishing flames in seconds. The smoke cleared to reveal a tower dripping and trembling but still standing. Evan staggered back, drenched and gasping, tears and sweat mixing on his face. Lily cried out, but this time it was joy. Max shook himself, fur plastered to his frame, tail wagging furiously as though the tower itself had chosen to fight beside them. The bell still tolled above, each strike echoing into the distance. People came running, men, women, children bundled against the night. They arrived with buckets and blankets but stopped in awe when they saw the geyser still surging, a living fountain spilling into the snow. Whispers rose in waves. "It's a spring, a true spring. God Almighty, it's water!" Caleb's eyes flicked beyond the crowd. He motioned to Max, and the dog bounded toward the truck that had skidded into the drift. Its rear door hung open, contents scattered on the ice. Lily, curious, followed close, Caleb at her side. As they drew near, Max sniffed furiously at a dark patch of snow, then dug with quick paws. Out came a small black card, scuffed and half-buried, a security pass, clipped with the Pierce Company insignia. Caleb picked it up, holding it under the glow of a flashlight. "Warehouse access," he muttered grimly. "Storage facility. This ties him straight to the dumps." Lily's small hand curled into his sleeve. "That means we can prove it, right?" Caleb nodded. For once his expression softened, almost tender, as he looked at the girl. "That means he's running out of shadows to hide in." Back at the tower, the geyser calmed into a steady flow, pooling at the base, trickling toward the frozen creek. The townspeople, their faces lit by lanterns, stood stunned by what they had witnessed. No longer whispers, no longer doubt. The tower had spoken, and it spoke of water that could not be burned or bought. Evan stood in the center of it all, soaked, weary, but unbroken. He met the eyes of his neighbors and saw something new, not pity, not scorn, but belief. For the first time he felt he wasn't fighting alone. Morning came not with silence, but with the murmur of half the town gathered at the tower's base. The geyser had steadied overnight into a strong, crystal stream that bubbled over the broken earth, sending rivulets across the frozen ground. In the pale sun, it shimmered like silver threads unraveling into the creek. People stood shoulder to shoulder, their breath misting in the cold, their faces filled with awe and questions. Officer Caleb Hayes had been on his feet since before dawn, his notebook thick with statements. He had taped off the area with yellow cordon line, though that did little to hold back the curious. He looked tired, the dark beneath his eyes deeper than usual, but his jaw was set with determination. Max paced inside the tape, tail wagging, occasionally stopping to lap at the fresh stream as if to prove its safety. Lily clapped each time he did, her scarf loose and her cheeks pink from the cold. 2 official vehicles arrived, crunching across the frost. From the first stepped Inspector Helen Ward of the Colorado Water Bureau. Helen was a tall woman in her early 50s, with long gray hair tied neatly at her neck and a lined face shaped by decades of fieldwork in harsh terrain. She carried herself with no-nonsense authority, a clipboard tucked under one arm. Her reputation was that of incorruptible steel. Towns in 3 counties knew she had once shut down a mining magnate for leaching mercury into a river. Her eyes, blue and sharp, scanned the geyser with professional calm, though a flicker of wonder betrayed her when the spray touched the light. From the second truck came Surveyor Daniel Collins, a lean man in his 40s with dark hair curling under his hat and round spectacles that made him look more like a teacher than a field worker. Collins was known for meticulous attention to detail, an almost obsessive love of numbers. He carried a worn leather case filled with measuring rods and instruments, the straps cutting into his narrow shoulders. A nervous habit had him pushing his glasses up every few seconds, but his voice, when he spoke, carried warmth that put witnesses at ease. "Artesian," Collins said after only a few moments of examining the site. He unrolled his equipment, lowering gauges into the opening. High pressure, natural, self-sustaining, no pumps required. He smiled faintly, as though seeing an old friend. Rare to find one this strong in the Rockies. Inspector Ward wrote quickly, "We'll need continuous data, protection barriers, and water rights documentation." She turned to Caleb. "You said you have evidence?" Caleb nodded, pulling the black security card from his pocket. "Recovered from the spill site. Belongs to Pierce Company. Matches the lock system at their chemical storage near Mill Junction." He flipped a page in his notebook, showing timestamps of the call he had placed during the fire. "We also have video. The bell ringing last night got folks outside with their cameras. I've collected 3 already, all showing Pierce's trucks near the creek during the blaze. Randall Pierce himself was there, his overcoat immaculate despite the mud around his boots. His pale eyes were cold, his smile a mere echo of charm. He had brought 2 lawyers, men in tailored suits who looked out of place in the snow, their leather shoes sinking miserably. Pierce raised his chin, his voice dripping with indignation. "Speculation. My trucks run water routes, yes, but no evidence proves we burned this tower or poisoned anything." Inspector Ward didn't flinch. She gestured toward the jackknifed tanker, still stuck in the drift. Its underside was coated in black sludge, the pipe still leaking residue into the snow. Townspeople muttered angrily, several pointing fingers. "We've lived here all our lives. We've seen those trucks dump at night," shouted an elderly rancher, his weathered face red with fury. Collins rose from his instruments, snow dusting his coat. "Flow rate is remarkable. Enough to irrigate hundreds of acres. This isn't just a spring, it's a lifeline. It needs to be secured immediately, and the rights should be held in trust for the community." Evan stood to the side, soaked clothes from last night stiff with frost. He had slept barely an hour, but the weight in his chest had lifted with each bucket of clean water neighbors drew from the pool. He looked across at Pierce and, for the first time, did not feel small. Lily skipped forward, dragging Max by his collar ribbon. Her small voice rang clear as she announced, "We should name it the Spring of Max, because he saved us with the bell, and he found the cover, and because he's the bravest dog in the whole world." The crowd broke into laughter, then applause. Even Inspector Ward's stern face softened as she nodded. Caleb crouched beside Lily, giving her a high five. Max barked twice, then shook himself so hard the ribbon around his neck snapped loose. He caught it in his teeth, prancing in a wide circle, tail wagging furiously, the picture of pride. Children laughed, clapping and chasing after him. Pierce's lawyers tried to object, but their voices were drowned by cheers. Ward raised her hand, silencing the noise. "This water belongs to Silver Creek. Effective immediately, it falls under Bureau protection. Any tampering will be prosecuted under state law." Her eyes locked on Pierce. "And I intend to follow up on every drop of chemical residue found here." The murmurs turned into open approval. Neighbors who once turned away from trouble now stepped closer to Evan, patting his back, clapping his shoulder. For the first time in years, Silver Creek's people weren't afraid. The spring bubbled behind them, steady and clear as though affirming its place. Randall Pierce stood alone, his pale eyes stripped of confidence, his coat a cage rather than armor. For the first time, he looked smaller than the man he had called a fool. 6 months later, Silver Creek no longer looked like the same weary mountain town that had once whispered in fear of Randall Pierce. Spring had melted into summer, and summer into a generous autumn. Where fields once lay brittle and gray, rows of corn now rose tall and golden, their tassels dancing in the wind. Apple trees bowed with fruit so heavy their branches had to be propped with sticks. The air smelled of cut hay and ripening harvest. The scent of prosperity returned. The miracle had a name, the Spring of Max. From the stone basin where the artesian water gushed, the town had built a network of small canals. Evan Carter, though no engineer, lent his carpenter's hands to shaping sluice gates and wooden bridges across the channels. His neighbors followed his lead, each adding something: shovels of earth, lumber beams, the sweat of their backs. The water, clear and cold, wound through the valley like veins, feeding every homestead. Evan had refused every offer to sell the land. Instead, he had signed a cooperative agreement drafted with the help of Inspector Ward and Surveyor Collins, ensuring that water rights belonged not to him alone but to Silver Creek itself. It was written in plain words, nailed to the town hall door. The spring belonged to all. Lily Carter had grown taller in those 6 months, her cheeks flushed with health instead of windburn, her step more confident. At school, she had become known as the watering ambassador. The children had planted a garden beside the one-room schoolhouse rows of beans, carrots, and bright sunflowers. Each day, Lily led them in turning the spigot to let water flow down the trenches, her laughter ringing with pride. Max followed her faithfully, older now in his gait but still sharp in spirit. His ear drooped as always, giving him his endearing look of mischief. He bore a collar hung with a small brass medallion engraved with the words, "Silver Creek thanks you." He would gnaw it gently in quiet moments, tail thumping, as if he knew the words were his alone to carry. Caleb Hayes had been honored at the county seat, a framed certificate commending his role in preserving the spring and exposing Pierce's corruption. Yet he shrugged off the attention, preferring to stay on patrol in Silver Creek, tipping his hat to children and stopping to help farmers fix broken gates. His square shoulders no longer seemed weighed down by weariness. He carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who had seen justice bloom. As for Randall Pierce, he had been indicted on charges of environmental violations and fraud. His bottled water empire cracked under scrutiny, and his lawyers, once smooth and smug, left town with their coats dirtied by mud and shame. The townsfolk no longer lowered their voices when his name was spoken. They spoke it with scorn, proof that power built on fear can crumble. On the edge of the spring, the town erected a wooden marker carved by Evan himself. It read, "Blessing runs deep, guarded by Max." Flowers were laid at its base, children's drawings tacked around it. The old bell salvaged from the tower was rehung on a simple frame, polished so it gleamed bronze in the sunlight. Autumn brought with it a new tradition, the Awakening Bell Contest. During the fall festival, townsfolk gathered to see who could pull the rope and send the bell's note rolling farthest across the valley. Every toll meant donations to the Clean Water Fund, set aside for schools and children. Laughter and cheers filled the air as men, women, and children tried their strength, though none matched the first wild pull Max had given on that desperate night. On one golden evening, as the sun sank low and painted the water in hues of amber and crimson, Evan sat on the bank, his daughter beside him, Caleb leaning against the fence. The town bustled around them, neighbors carrying baskets of apples, children chasing each other through the fields. Max stretched out in the grass, paws crossed, ears twitching at the sounds of life he had helped protect. He gnawed lightly on his medallion, then rested his chin on his paws, eyes half closed in contentment. Evan looked over the fields, the canals, the laughter of children, and whispered, "All this for 50 cents. Lily leaned against him, smiling. And for Max. The water gurgled beside them, steady as a heartbeat, carrying with it the promise of life that no fire, no greed, and no fear could extinguish again. In the end, the story of Silver Creek is not just about a hidden spring or a battle against greed. It is about how faith, courage, and loyalty can bring forth miracles when hope seems lost. Just as the earth revealed its blessing of water in the darkest hour, God reminds us every day that His grace flows where we least expect it. Maybe your own life feels like a barren field right now. Maybe you carry burdens no one else sees. But remember this, the same God who allowed a fountain to burst through the ashes of a burning tower can also release rivers of hope in your life. Miracles are not far away. They are waiting in the quiet places of faith and perseverance. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear about second chances. Leave a comment below, tell us where you are watching from, and if you believe in God's power to turn despair into hope, type Amen in the comments. Do not forget to subscribe for more stories that will strengthen your spirit. May God bless you, your family, and every step you take, and may His living water never stop flowing in your life.